Hello and welcome to the Bigger Than Us podcast. Today I'd like to welcome Roshan Vani to the show. Roshan Vani is the COO and one of the co founders of Nexus PMG. Roshan, welcome to the show.
Hey Raj, Happy New Year. How you doing?
Good. Happy New Year to you. Roshan, I'd like to kick things off with, some of your observations from last year, 2019, seem to be a pivotal time in climate change, climate movement. And, I know that you're on the ground quite a bit. What have you seen regarding some of these, renewable and sustainable sectors, some of the changes you've seen?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think what we're seeing at Nexus, and to try to answer your question, I can probably best point to, um, I'll call it the inbound opportunities that come to Nexus. We've seen a very large shift in opportunities, specifically in uh, the the sustainable, clean sector economy types of projects. So whereas only in the last couple of years, and I'll call it 2014, 2015, we were seeing a lot of different requests coming from funds and private equity to do, I'll call it more traditional based infrastructure assessments and due diligence. What we're seeing now in terms of what's in our top of the funnel and where the types of projects we're evaluating, we're seeing probably almost double the number of waste to value specifically types of projects, everything from looking at different solutions, whether it be in cow manure, just agricultural waste in general, as well as municipal solid waste.
So, are you seeing an uptake in investor interest, or do you think it's coming from both sides, investors, developers, etc.?
I think the development community, and I'm probably providing more of an opinion than a fact here, but has been in existence for quite some time. I think what we're seeing are there's definitely an interest in the investment community where we're seeing specialized funds that that are coming in and investing in this space and trying to advance developers and technology to solve different waste problems in our current economy. Um, Solid waste management in general is a universal issue. It's one that's not going away, and I think only getting worse over time. I mean, as a human race and economy now, we're basically consumer driven, which generates quite a bit of waste. Pretty much anything you buy, there's an entire supply chain behind it that has its own different levels of waste streams that are generated. And I think there's a lot of folks that see opportunity now in that sector to both do good, as well as I think on other podcasts you always talk about the triple bottom line. Be able to um, do good, but also build healthy companies.
I know that last year you were on the road quite a bit and you're visiting different teams and municipalities. And last year also we had that issue where China has decided to no longer take waste from the US. Are you seeing any reverberations through those communities or more questions coming up regarding that?
You know, I think we're definitely seeing. Let me kind of answer that differently.
Hmm.
As we talk to whether it be organizations that want to be more sustainable, be it airport as an infrastructure, you can only imagine how much waste airports generate, or it be municipalities that are trying to solve the waste problem. I think coming back to what I mentioned earlier about investors seeing that as a potential opportunity, I think with the social change that is happening, organizations, whether it be a public or a private organization, are looking internally to themselves and actually saying, what can we do to be better? And how can we be more sustainable? And a lot of that, if you take that down even further, is being driven by the employees, by the communities, by the folks that they're effectively there to, whether they're developing a product or a service, their customer base or people that matter within their sphere, if you will, are demanding change. And I think that's sparking something really interesting. For me, I spend a lot of time on our projects that we're executing. Spend a lot of time internally talking to folks within our company, and you even hear it within Nexus PMG of when I ask a lot of the new hires, like, why did you come and join us? I think there's a couple different answers I usually get. From you're an interesting company, we feel like we could do something different, all the way to we like what you stand for, and the fact that Nexus PMG is going, into develop working with developers and investors in that circular economy. So at the end of the day, I think that's that spark
Hmm.
of being socially conscious is happening at the lowest levels of organizations and communities, which is really starting to drive awareness, which is then causing, infrastructure in general. I'm just going to use that broadly to look at waste streams and figuring out ways to solve the problem. And look, a lot of this technology has been around for a while. It's just how can we get it to a point where it's commercially viable, right? I think that's where we're seeing more and more opportunities where these types of projects do pencil out.
Two questions came to mind while you were speaking there. One is regarding the projects. Now, you're probably not able to disclose all the projects that you're working on, but are there any favorites that come to mind, or some that you see that has a lot of potential going forward?
For me, yeah, I mean, I just think in general, regardless of how you feel about, just use the term loosely, broadly, climate change, there is a massive waste problem, and I don't care what side of the aisle you sit on. Digging holes and putting our garbage into those holes is not a real long-term strategy. And
Hmm.
so, what excites me as an engineer, as I, I always struggle with, what does a COO really do as a problem solver, is what I like to define it as. There's a real problem in today's economy, market, in just how driven we are as a consumer based society, where I want to be part of the solution. And so, broadly speaking, there is interesting technology that we're seeing, whether it be gasification, anaerobic digestion, pyrolysis, just lots of different technologies that exist today that have a real path to commercialization to solve. And I'll chalk it up to organic, coming up with solutions for organic waste, right? So anything that's comprised of hydrogen and carbon, under the right conditions, we can put this organic matter into one of many different black boxes that, under the right conditions of temperature and moisture, et cetera, we can move those at the molecular level, move them around and produce different byproducts with the trash we generate. And so if you think of that, that term circular economy, if we are generating all this trash instead of just digging holes and throwing it into a landfill, you know, why can't we come up with good solutions? And as a problem solver, that's just a problem that I would love to be a part of solving, and that's what excites me. We're looking at a host of different things, but you know, and again, as someone that is inspired in technology, that spent a better part of my first 10 years in traditional energy, in power generation, complicated processes excite me. I absolutely love wind and solar, but they're, from a pure excitement level, a lot of the chemistry behind what goes into, the everything from the thermal process to the technologies in general, being able to take one thing and create something else by, going through those different processes is pretty exciting to watch and be a part of.
It's it sounds really exciting, and I think this entire space, as I think I've heard you call it, waste to value. I think going forward, and to your point, regardless of which side of the aisle you sit on, if we can just do a little bit better what we have right now, I don't think it should be it should matter what side you sit on. So I agree with you. Something you mentioned earlier regarding talent. What are you seeing from a talent pipeline? Do we need more people in this space? Are there enough? How do you view the talent pipeline?
Well, I'll do my best to continue to stay away from politics, but I kind of drip it in here again. You know, these plants are complicated. They're industrial processes, and I think one of the things that I always try to do is look for areas of collaboration versus looking for things that divide us. And so, again, regardless of what side of the aisle you sit on when it comes to climate change and where we're at from a CO2 perspective, both the labor pools that built the current infrastructure within the United States, everything from our natural gas, the same folks that are involved, the same pipe fitters that are involved in the fracking process, you know, that labor talent pool is going to be the same talent pool of folks that as a society we're going to lean on to help us redevelop our infrastructure in the United States. And so I always like to look for the upside and everything. And so for me, we have a very, we always hear, just the trades in general are declining, but there are still very talented folks, in the building trades within the United States. And I am excited about the fact that we can go out and rebuild our infrastructure, um, and leverage the talent that exists right now, on folks that are building more traditional, energy based process facilities. Because, I mean, just to be quite frank, the folks that are involved in building our I'll call it light commercial, light industrial facilities, red steel, if you will call it, the pre engineered buildings are really not the same folks that we need on the industrial side when we talk about welding specialty alloy type pipes together, or and that pool of resources will be coming from traditional infrastructure, the folks that I'll call it get demonized in this process. And so
Hmm.
that excites me. And then I think if you take that up to the professional services that feed that, right? Your engineering, your project management. Um, what we're seeing there is also an increased level of interest where there is definitely a younger generation of folks that are in that industry. And I'll call that industry traditional infrastructure, traditional energy, rather, that have the skills and talents that we need to redesign and implement our infrastructure to be able to solve these types of problems, and actually develop a proper circular economy solving things like our waste problems. So I see there being a lot of talent, and especially in the next generation of engineers that are joining more traditional companies that build refineries, build traditional gas-fired power plants, that necessarily don't have a passion for what they're doing. But let's be real. I mean, we got to be able to cover your bills. I mean,
Hmm.
so in terms of recruiting in this sector, it's been almost overwhelming when we do talk to people um, that make the shift over to Nexus. When I ask them, come and trying to tie this all together, why did you come to Nexus? There's definitely a large percentage of younger engineers answering that question with, we like, and it's not just engineering, by the way, it's project management, construction management. We like what you stand for and what you're trying to do in the industry. And so, but I definitely wanted to open up with the idea of that collaboration versus demonizing. And there's definitely an element of that happening right now.
Hmm. So, staying on the trades for a minute, and I've heard you say some numbers in the past, but for those that might not be aware, can you give some ballpark figures of the kind of salary ranges that you've seen for specific trades?
Oh, I mean, high pressure welding, um, on the road with per diem, or they're easily, in the high 100s right now that we're seeing. I'm talking about folks that can actually, that weld high pressure, boiler tubes, for example. There's definitely a massive talent gap in the specialty trades right now. So, but I think you're also seeing, I know I've talked to others about it that are really interested in both millennials and specifically the Gen Xers behind them. Help me out here, Raj. What's the generation
In,
after them?
I think the digitals, natives.
Yeah. Anyway, I think there's a huge shift in terms of, is college the only path to a successful career? And I think we will see at some point a version of the trades coming back. I think what we've seen over the last 20 years or so, that this idea of going to college as your way out and doing new different things isn't for everyone. So there's definitely been a focus on I'll call it higher education, and the trades have really suffered for that. But there's definitely an opportunity for folks in the trades and to build really cool things. You know,
You know,
s-
I've had
Good.
I've had the pleasure of having conversations with a couple of cities here in the area, and they are actually trying to convey the same message that you did. Is that, for the past, let's call it 20 years, there's been this whole push towards STEM, which I'm not saying is not important, but college in general, and like you said, shun towards the trades, and they're trying to encourage more individuals to look at the trades because people aren't aware of the potential to earn, not only a good but perhaps a above average living in those trades.
Yeah, 100%. It's anything in excess in one direction is always a bad thing. Just kind of like, I mean, you can almost
Toad.
point to anything, right? So,
Yep. Toad.
um, and it feels like that's what's happened over the last 15, 20 years. So and it's, I think you're also seeing this idea of college as the only source of validating talent is slowly going away. I mean, I know Google has recently announced, 4 year standard degrees aren't a requirement. I think you're seeing, it's going to be interesting to watch it. I don't pretend to be a futurist or make predictions, but I do think there's going to be an element of specialty things, whether it be software development, traditional trades, and this idea of, you don't really have to go into large amounts of student debt to be able to be happy and you know, start a career, and like I said, everything from robotics to, what's called RPA to,
Hmm.
just software development, AI, machine learning. There's a lot of really interesting things that I think what we're going to see is these specialty institutions develop what mimic the trade schools of the past that will generate very strong talent for the technologies of the future, if you will, without the large debt structure that lives right now for a traditional 4 year and postgraduate degree. So it's going to be interesting.
Hmm. So you said you're not a futurist, but let's just pretend you are for a moment. It's 2020 right now, January 2nd. Over the next decade or two, how do you see this space of perhaps waste to value, clean tech, this entire movement change, or what do you see happening in this landscape?
If I point to the idea of what everyone always talks about with millennials and experiences and local, you can kind of sum that up to what I think is going to be interesting in this world, which is, you've talked about in the past, which is decentralization in general, right?
Hmm.
This idea of shopping local, shopping small, going back to, you know, leave the big box stores, pay a little bit more for quality. And I see what we've gone through, this idea of large centralized, let's just take power, for example. I'm a power guy, but, large generation, if, moving to more distributed, decentralized power generation and the use of, these microgrids, and, how can communities get together and become more self-sustaining, and then that morphs into everything, all infrastructure around it, right? I mean, do we then can we then take that down into both the waste management as well? I mean, one of the things my wife and I were talking about is, looking at how can we be more sustainable. And one of the ones, we have a lot of family in Toronto, but it's amazing when you're up there, just like kitchen scraps, right? They have to compost up there. Like, we should be composting more down here. We shouldn't be just throwing away everything, right?
Hmm.
And then going from that composting to growing more of our own fruits and vegetables. And so, if I were to make a big, gigantic, prediction, that I think that I would love to see more urban farmers and just decentralization in general. And as an operations guy, that's one of the things we even do from a business perspective. I mean, let's just take, this is going to sound really nerdy, but when we looked at Nexus has been scaling at an astronomical rate. And just take something as simple as like expense reports, right? We would
Hmm.
we used to take everything from all of our individuals, and when we were 5 or 6 person company, it was easy to go route all those invoices into one centralized place and then have our office manager sort and do all of those things. Well, as a 60 plus person company, that idea of just centralized invoices coming into one place to be processed is so inefficient, right? So
Hmm.
we implemented a real simple system. I'm not going to go plug all these different systems, but we put a little bit more burden on the individual to process their own expense reports, code it correctly, and then migrate that, idea of decentralizing, if you will, is a terrible example with expense reports, but, taking that invoicing process and putting a little bit of extra burden on the individuals. And we tried, I mean, if you think about it, it's kind of what we did with recycling in municipal solid waste, right? Like, okay, now everyone in Dallas has two bins, one for recycling, right, and one for trash. And the burden was put on, on the sorting on the individual. The problem is that that solution for the centralized waste management was now, what do we do with all this plastic? Let's say, right, to tying it back to
Right.
your question earlier. Well, we'll send it to China for them to process. Well, they have more than they don't know what to do with, so it's coming back, right? So,
Hmm.
how can we put a little bit of extra burden on the individual to make this process a little bit better? Again, my wife and I are trying to take some of that on with, do we really need to throw away all of our kitchen scraps, or can we compost? Right, that's one of the things we're looking at right now. So that would be my prediction is what can we do? And right now it's too easy, right? And that's part of the problem is no one really wants anything to change. And there are things in place that do make our lives just a little bit easier. Take plastic bags at the checkout counter, right? I know
Hmm.
at least here in Dallas they tried to implement it and there was huge pushback, but by saying we're going to charge you for a plastic bag, but those little bits of friction are what you need. I mean, if you talk to anyone that started a business or is trying to grow a business, I mean, friction is actually what makes it move, right? I mean, you need that tension and that push and
Right.
pull to move things forward. So I guess that's where I would like to see more is, if I were to make a prediction rather, but not like see more, but would be to see where we can create those little bits of friction and go from this centralized idea and add just a little bit of extra burden to everyone else, to not make it your local government's problem to go solve the waste problem on their own, but how can we collaboratively as a community solve that problem?
So you're saying shared burden, which I actually do like the idea of. And as you were talking, I was just thinking that, we get trash bins from the city. What if we could pay, a nominal amount and get a composting bin or barrel too from the city and then be responsible for taking care of that ourselves?
For sure, right? I mean, it seems like a real simple idea, right? Just
It really does. And I guess it's the idea of getting people to buy into the program. There's been some other programs in the past where it's almost where, and I think I've seen it in solar or electricity, where people are given these little signs and badges to put in their yard that their house is now solar or their utilities are now lower, and it almost creates this small like competitive mindset within a neighborhood, and people tend to come into this thinking, okay, my neighbor's saving money, how can I save money? It becomes almost like a friendly competition. And I wonder if we can start doing things around trash the same way, where you get a compost bin from the city and you get to put a little tag or something on your window saying I'm composting, and kind of influence your neighbors to do the same behavior, and then to your point, share that burden.
Yeah, and it comes back to, I mean, if I were to refer to a couple of, because I'm an avid listener of your podcast, I mean, I think Dr. CB was talking about like the spheres of influence, right? So if you can kind of evaluate your own spheres of influence on, where can you do your part just to start making a small difference. And it's those little steps that matter, right? And coming back to this idea of distribution, decentralization. It's not my problem. Something, it's someone else's problem. If we can all just take on a little bit of that, um, I think it could be super interesting to see what happens, and how can we all collaboratively work together to solve our waste problem.
Absolutely. So going back to talent, if there's talent out there right now looking to make a change or perhaps thinking that they're not sure what this, space looks like, can you give some advice to them?
I guess I will. The advice is, I think, a little bit broader in general, which is, um, I think there's a lot of people that are interested in a host of different things, and this is probably just one of many things that they're probably interested in. And I think there's just a simpler overarching message, which is network and grow your network in these different areas to find out what's actually happening. I'll just lean into, one of my big passions is small businesses and startups. And for the first several years of when we formed Nexus, we were heads down, building the business, not really outside of our own little bubble. And so as I had additional time and free time, one of the things that I just naturally enjoy doing is interacting with other people. And so I, got involved in the Dallas startup community, which at the time I had no idea how big it even was, right? I mean, Dallas startup didn't even make I didn't even I thought if you wanted to be a startup, you're in Silicon Valley, right? That's
Right.
like, that was just my idea. And then all of a sudden you realize there's this whole network of people doing really cool things in the Dallas community. And even now to this day, when I talk to other people, they have it within just like, whether it's other dads and in the dads group of my children's daycare, they have no idea there's even a startup community. I mean, take that further to this conversation. I mean, there are folks in Texas focused very, very narrowly on, um, green sustainable energy within just the ERCOT Texas market. Like,
Mhm.
just go get involved, show up to an event and network, and then from there it's like the possibilities are limitless, right? It's one of the things I think, even in when you talk about talent in this industry, I think a lot of folks, if I were to try to tie it back to how can, the folks that built the infrastructure of our current environment, if you have a passion and you want to be building, solar farms versus oil and gas refineries, best way to really go figure out what's out there is to go grow your network in those spaces in your own free time. And then depending on, you know who and where you land, and with a little bit of patience, you can migrate away from those industries and into industries you really want to be in. And I really think that's true for anything, honestly. Whether you're trying to grow a company, whether you're trying to go learn how to develop the first viral virtual reality app, or,
Mm.
um, you know, for my wife and I, just trying to figure out how to be more sustainable and teach our kids. I mean, there's basically local urban farming communities that we've been looking at because I think we both have a brown thumb. And so, it's one of those things that I'd like to be, growing a little bit more in our backyard. So that's one of the things I'm trying to do right now is figure out how to go reach out in those communities and learn how to grow some tomatoes.
Well, that's really interesting, and I think it's a great place to leave off. I love that advice. Get out and network, learn more about the whether it's communities or jobs or industries that you're interested in. Roshan, it's been a pleasure having you on. Thank you so much, and I look forward to catching up with you again soon.
Yeah, Rush, thank you.